Hello and welcome everyone, this is Calebovitsch coming to you with another Flesh and Blood video with the Briar Drafts Guide. This is going to be part 1 of the trilogy where I talk about Briar the Elemental Runeblade. I hope you've already seen the Lexi and Oldham trilogies, so this is the third trilogy. I don't know if there's a word for it as well. Anyway, let's get started and let's talk about the hero in question, and this is Briar. She's an elemental rune blade. We're obviously talking about the young version with the 420 stat line, 4 intellect and 20 starting health. She's got the essence of earth and lightning, which means you can have both earth and lightning cards in your deck. And here's the thing about the elements in Tales of Aria. There's Earth, which has the most expensive cards and the biggest attacks. There's Ice, which is somewhere in the middle, and there's Lightning, which has the cheapest attacks, actions, and fastest things to go at you, or rather at the opponents. So if you're thinking about Lexi, Lexi is Ice and Lightning, which is two of the cheaper ones. When you're thinking about Oldham, it's the two more expensive ones. When you're thinking about Briar, she's got the most expensive one and the cheapest one, which means she has her options of either going for lightning or going for earth diverge by a lot. I mean, you're thinking about 0-1 cost attack versus 2-3 cost attacks instead of 0-1 versus 1-2, for example. Anyway, whenever an attack action card you control deals damage to an opposing hero, create an embodiment of Earth token. An embodiment of Earth token is this one. It says, non-attack action cards you control have +1 defense while defending. At the beginning of your action phase, destroy embodiment of Earth. This means that for every instance that your attack actions can deal damage to the opposing hero, your non-attack actions on the opposing hero's turn are going to be yours will be blocking for more. Okay, so usually most of your non-attack actions block for 2. So they too will be blocking for 3. If you have multiple embodiments, 4 or even more, which means that those breakpoint attacks for 4 or 7 are not as difficult to deal with anymore. I mean, usually when someone attacks you with a huge whopping attack for 7, even if you block with 2 3s, you still take 1 damage. Here, if you have 2 embodiments of Earth, then your non-attack actions block for 4 each. So you just play 2 of these out, and suddenly all the damage has been blocked. So that is indeed great and amazing. Also, this says whenever an attack action card you control deals damage. That means that, for example, if you play, let's say, a Singeing Steel Blade that says when you attack with this, deal 1 arcane damage to target hero, it deals 1 arcane damage, it gives you an embodiment of Earth, and then the attack, if it's not fully blocked, it can create an additional embodiment of Earth. Also, I would like to point out right now a quite important thing that LSS has brought up most recently in one of their news releases, and that is during tournament play. If you're playing someone like Briar who can create tokens, or Viserai who's creating those rune chants, etc. If you don't have any embodiments, you can't have these cards on your board. It's not like, okay, so I have this, it's a reminder that I have this ability, but actually I don't have any embodiments. If I get 1 embodiment, I just put a dice here with 1. No, that's not how it works. If you don't have any embodiments, take them out of your field. That's a PSA from Calebovitsch. But let's get back to Briar. The second embodiment that she can create is an embodiment of lightning. Whenever you play your second non-attack action card each turn, create this embodiment of lightning token. And what this does is when you play an attack action card, destroy this, and the attack gains go again. Briar, as the third rune blade of the game, also has a combo nature where you have to balance your non-attack actions and attack actions, and obviously go again, additional action points is a huge part of that, especially if you're taking into consideration her weapon, the Rosetta Thorn. It is a runeblade weapon, two-handed, It also means that the other 2 Rune Blades can use it. Once per turn action, 1 resource attack for 2. Although, whenever you attack with Rosetta Thorn, if you've played an attack action card and a non-attack action card this turn, deal 2 arcane damage to target hero. And in this set, there are only 2 ways to mitigate arcane damage. Both are on legendary equipments. There's the Ice Armor, Ice Chest, that has Arcane Barrier 1, and there are the Lightning Arms that have Spell Void 2. So, in other words, arcane damage is almost unblockable. So this is very good inevitability for late game, but you have to remember to go for those combo turns. Okay, when I was talking about Lexi, Lexi's ability and Lexi's weapon were doing a lot, okay? For Oldham, the weapon was there, but the ability was so much more with the defense reaction. For Briar, although her ability is great, a lot of people say that Rosetta Thorn is the best Rune Blade card that you can have, and given that it's a token and you have it in all your games, that means you want to focus on Rosetta Thorn, you want to focus on the inevitability of dealing that arcane damage. I mean, look, she attacks from both sides, right? So she attacks for you the regular physical damage and arcane damage. And 1 resource, deal 2 and 2, that's a lot, that's a ton. I mean, Guardian has to spend 3 to swing with the hammer, and sometimes it's for 3, not always it's for 4. For Lexi, she needs to have those arrows. So yes, Rosetta Thorn is for the most part what makes Briar so good. I mean, sure, embodiments are fine, blocking for more is fine, but on the other hand, Briar doesn't want to block that much because she is counting on having those 4 or 5 card turns, even more so because the more cards she has, the more explosive her turns are, and she can deal 10 or more damage quite easily. A decently built Briar, even in a draft, can deal upwards 10 or more, maybe even up to 20 damage in a single turn in a draft, if she has access to full 5 cards. So that is huge and amazing, and honestly, a lot. So, once again, the game plan for Briar is to have explosive turns, especially if you are on the go wide variant, on playing an attack with go again, or a couple of non-attack actions, giving your attack a go again with that embodiment of lightning. And even if you don't use embodiment of lightning on the turn where you create it, it stays over to the next turn, and you can do a setup for your next turn. So once again, quite combogenic. The other mode for Briar to go at your opponent is to just play a whopping ton of buffs to buff 1 attack in a turn, and for this attack to go at the opponent for 10 or more damage. And it is usually quite difficult to block those. She can't give Dominate to those attacks, but once again, the inevitability comes not from Dominate attacks, but from the arcane damage, both on Rosetta Thorn and on the Rune Blade cards as well. There is a downside to this class. It is a rather variance-driven downside, because your combo nature can lead to really awkward turns if you draw a hand of 4 non-attack actions and the only damage you can deal to your opponent is with a Rosetta Thorn, and that's only 2, or you can just set up an embodiment of lightning and that's it. Or if you draw 4 attack actions and you don't have any ways of giving them go again. And usually you have to pitch 1 to play the other one, and maybe arsenal the 3rd one and block with the 4th one. But that's not what Briar is about. She's not about attacking for 4 in a turn. She's about attacking for 7 and following it up with an attack for 4 and following it up with Rosetta Thorn for 2 and 2 arcane. Okay, so yeah, the next question that usually comes up in the Tales of Aria draft format is, okay, elements. So we have lightning, we have earth. How important for Briar is the fusion part on her class cards? You might remember from the previous videos, for Oldham, the need to fuse was rather low. For Lexi, it was kind of okay. She kind of needed to get those going, but I believe that her hero ability was much more important than that. For Briar, each fusion means 2 or 3 more damage that is going at your opponent, sometimes even more when you're thinking about cards like Invigorate, which boosts only the attacks that you can fuse. So yeah, you need a lot of those elemental cards, but with Briar, you usually tend to go one way or the other, which is either Earth or Lightning, and you should have a lot of those as well. Okay, so let me give you an example, or a couple of examples, on how a Briar turn might look, because, well, as in all combo decks, it is... it sometimes is not as easy as it might look. I mean, sure, if you've already played a couple of games with Briar, that's going to be easy, but if you've never touched a Runeblade class, that might be a bbit more difficult. So, let's say this is hand number 1. This is Red Veil Flash, Red Singeing Steel Blade, and Blue Weave Earth. And you have no arsenal. And, well, you have 2 attacks, 2 non-attacks, and you can do a lot of things with all of this, but how to maximize it? You need to go for combos, go for sequences. You also have to remember, if you're playing with Ball Lightning, when your chain ends and not. And remember, your combat chain ends every time you play a non-attack action. So if you go Ball Lightning, non-attack action to create an embodiment of lightning to go for an attack action, then the last attack action doesn't have that additional buff from Ball Lightning. Also, I would like to point out that if you don't know any of the cards that I'm talking about, you can see any of the text here, or I'm not explaining a card or another. There is a link in the description of the video to fabtcg.com and the full gallery for cards for Tales of Aria, and you can just browse those at your leisure. You can even pause the video. You can just go there. You can take a better look at the cards in all the pitches that I'm talking about, etc. Anyway, Veil of Flash, Singeing Steel Blade, Weave Earth. So what you can do with this hand, and this is just one way to look at it, because you might want to arsenal specific cards, the situation on the board might be different, etc, etc. But let's say your opponent had their turn 0 and this is your turn 1 and you want to deal as much damage as possible. So what you could do with this hand is you could play Veil of Flash. This is a 1-cost attack for 5. So there we go, we pitch Weave Earth, we're left with 2 resources. And that is Lightning Fusion. If this was fused, you may play your next non-attack action card this turn as though it were an instant. So you don't need to use an action point to do that. And Flash is a lightning action, so you fuse it, you attack for 5, and then even though you don't have any action points, you can still play a non-attack action. So after the attack resolves, whether the opponent blocks or not, you can play Flash. And Flash says the next action card you play this turn with cost 0 or greater gains Go Again, and this has Go Again. So even though after having played Veil Flash, you didn't have any action points, playing regular Flash refreshes your action point and gives Go Again to your next action card as well. So with that Go Again, you can go for Singeing Steel Blade, deal 1 arcane damage to the opponent. This is the moment where you for sure create at least 1 embodiment of Earth from that arcane damage. You still attack the opponent for 4, so you can create even more embodiments of Earth. And from Flash, this has Go Again, which means you can spend your last resource point to attack the opponent with this cool-looking Cold Foil Rosetta Thorn for 2 and 2 arcane damage. But remember, these embodiments are only created from attack action cards, so Rosetta Thorn doesn't create these. But still, if let's say in the event the opponent was not blocking at all because they wanted to have a full turn, it was 5 and 1 and 4 and 2 and 2. That's a whopping 14 damage, 11 regular from 3 different attacks, and 3 arcane from 2 different attacks. So that's a lot, seriously a lot. And when it comes back to your turn, your non-attack actions will be able to block for even more, if you want to do that, obviously. Okay, so that was example turn number 1, how explosive Briar can be. Now, for example number 2, you have a slightly different hand, but it is apparently an even better one, because you have the favorite card of all Briar players, Bramble Spark, in two pieces. You have a yellow Bramble Spark, a red Bramble Spark, you have a red Stir the Wildwood, and you have a blue Autumn's Touch. And for Bramble Spark, and for some of the Briar zero-cost fusion cards, the amazing part is you can play this, you can play a zero-cost, you can fuse it, in this case with an Earth card, and then you can use the Earth card as your resources to play some other things. And in this case, you would do exactly that. You're playing Bramble Spark number 1, and you're fusing it with an Earth card. It costs 0, so that's cool. The next attack action card you play this turn gets, when you attack with this, deal 1 arcane damage to target hero. If Bramble Spark was fused, the next attack action card you play this turn gains +2 attack. So for 0 and a fuse, you're dealing 2 and 1 more damage from your next attack action. Then you're playing Bramble Spark Red, using it again. This time it's gonna give your next attack, obviously, the 1 more arcane damage, and +3 because it's red. Also, you've already played 2 non-attack actions, which means you can create an Embodiment of Lightning token. Sure. And then you're left with 2 attacks. So you can play, let's say, Stir the Wildwood. You're left with 1 resource in your pitch zone. This is Earth Fusion, but you cannot fuse it anymore. You've already used that card for resources. If you have dealt arcane damage to an opposing hero this turn, Stir the Wildwood gains +2 attack, and if we had fused it, it would gain +2 attack as well. So this is also kind of fused with 2 Bramble Sparks, right? So it deals 1 arcane damage to the opponent, creating an Embodiment of Earth for you. It deals 1 arcane damage to the opponent, creating the other Embodiment of Earth token for you. And +2, +3, +2, because you've dealt arcane damage to your opponent, and the 5 base one, so that's 12 damage. 2 arcane, 2 tokens, 12 damage, and it has go again. So I would assume the opponent lets through at least 1 damage, because they would have to have 4 3s to block with, and they still have been dealt 2 damage, so let's say it's a 3rd Embodiment of Earth. And lo and behold, you still have an action point, you still have 1 resource, and you can still smack them with the Rosetta Thorn for 2 and 2. If that's not cool, I don't know what is. Okay. So yeah, this is these were some examples of Briar, of how explosive her full hand turns can be. You can also do a more defensive play, like if you had those Embodiments of Earth from the previous turn, and your opponent is whacking you in the head for a lot, you can just block with those non-attack actions, block to your Heart's Delight for 2 and the number of the tokens, and even if you're left with such 2 cards, you can still pitch, and you can still attack them for 5 or 6 or 7, because she's got those expensive and high-hitting Earth attacks that can hit for 6 or 7, or probably, yeah, 6 or 7, unless Entwine Earth fused or something like that. It's also quite important for Briar to arsenal some cards and set up your Rosetta Thorn turns, because once again, she's usually playing like a combo deck, so we have to have that in mind. Okay, now for the end, let's go through matchups and how they look. So your matchup against Lexi can be quite difficult, and it's probably your most difficult one, especially if Lexi can start taxing you with arrows and and Dominate Arrows and Frostbite. Because Lexi can deal whopping amounts of damage, like with like a red overflex into loading a bow into shooting a red arrow that's already 10 damage from 2 1-costing cards, and she doesn't have to have go again, and she can arsenal an ice card and tax you with a frostbite token. So yeah, that can be quite stressful, and I would believe that a well-built Ice Lexi deck is probably your biggest problem. So what you want to be doing against that is you want to keep pressure on, and it is all about math. It is all about how much damage you can deal with your hand. Let's say the potential goes up the more cards in hand you have. So if they're just doing an attack for 5 and you have a combogenic hand, it is better to let everything through, because each card that you will not be playing in a turn costs you a lot, right? So if this 4-card hand can deal, it was 12 regular, 2 arcane, 2 arcane, and 2 regular, so that's 18 damage. But if you don't have one of these because you have to block with it for 3, then the remainder of this hand doesn't really do a lot. I mean, let's say you've blocked with this Bramble Spark. So that was already 3 more damage that the opponent would be taking. So the question is dealing 3 damage to the opponent more important than blocking for 2 and the number of Embodiment of Earth tokens that you have? And there is no plain and simple yes or no answer to that at this point, because it always depends on the game situation. Okay, on your life totals, on what you have in your deck, on what the opponent has, arsenal situation, etc., etc. Okay. Against a mirror match, against another Briar player, this once again is all about calculating damage, of taking a look at which combo pieces in your hand are more important. Do you have any spare cards that you can block with? Maybe you want to have like a weaker turn, block as much as you can, and arsenal that 0-cost non-attack action that can be really good on your future turn, and just try to pivot from that moment on. The Oldhim match is probably usually in your favor, because you are going for the inevitability. Oldhim, an Oldhim deck has 2 main modes. They are either ultra defensive, just smacking you with the hammer and trying to block everything that they can, or a more aggressive variant that is playing those 7, 8, 9, or 10 attacks at you and trying to put the pressure on you. So against the more aggressive variant, you obviously have to calculate damage a bit better, but Oldhim doesn't have as many on-hit effects as another Briar player or a Lexi player with those fused arrows. So usually you can let like 1 or 2 attacks through because you have a big turn, because you can smack back. But you have to remember about Oldhim's defense reaction, especially the earth, I mean, honestly, both parts of Oldhim's reaction. And his defense reaction is pay 3 resources. If you pitched an earth card to play for that, you prevent the next 2 damage that would be dealt to you this turn. So it's like a shield over Oldhim for regular damage or arcane damage or any other types of damage the game might include in future sets. On the other hand, if you pitched an ice card to pay for that, the opposing player has to take a card from their hand and put it on top of their deck. So when you're playing against an Oldhim player, you have to pitch very carefully. So even if you know that your attack/non-attack has go again, and you want to be attacking with Rosetta Thorn, you have to overpitch. Let's say I had an Embodiment of Lightning from the previous turn, right? I just want to overpitch for this. Let's say I have these 2 cards, right? And an Embodiment. And I want to play this, Steer, and I want to attack Rosetta Thorn. So I could just pitch Bramble Spark, attack with this, No, that doesn't make any sense. I would still overpitch. Anyway, overpitching. Overpitching is what I wanted to say. I just can't come up with a good example off the top of my head, but I hope you know what I mean. You have to pitch for more resources. You have to have power up left for your Rosetta Thorn, etc., etc. On the other hand, if the opponent wants to use the defense reaction to prevent damage, you need to remember that once you're attacking with a powered up Rosetta Thorn, the arcane damage is getting dealt or goes on the stack at the moment you declare your attack. So it's declare attack to arcane damage, then they block with cards from their hand. Then it's your attack reactions, then it's their defense reaction. So that arcane damage goes through. On the other hand, if the Oldhim player is a crafty old fella or lady and knows what they're doing, then they might put the prevention shield up on one of your previous attacks. Let's say you're playing, do I have an attack with Go again here? Let's say you played that Veil of Flash combo with Singeing Steelblade, okay? So as you play Veil of Flash and you reveal Flash, the opponent knows that something is going to be up, okay? That you will have the option to attack with Rosetta Thorn. So they could block Veil of Flash with 2 cards, and they could put the prevention shield up at this moment, at this point. So then the Singeing Steelblade or the Rosetta Thorn arcane damage gets sucked in by that. But that doesn't always work for them, and I would say that you are favored against Oldhim. About even in the mirror, depends on the players, depends on the decks, etc. And as far as Lexi goes, you are probably slightly below average, below 50%, but that also depends on the players. I mean, that's what's so cool about this draft format. Even if there's a game of rock, paper, scissors, even if you put in Lizard and Spock into that equation, it still always depends. Like, as I said, Oldhim usually has problems against Briar in a draft. In my most recent draft, as an example, on the draft pod, 8 people, 5 Briar, 3 Oldhim, 0 Lexi. Yes, that happened. That actually happened. 1 hero was missing. Where is she? We don't care. Anyway, 5 Briars, which means that Briar was overdrafted. And in my first round, I played against a player who had 1 or 2 cracked baubles in their deck. So they didn't have enough cards to put in their deck, okay? So that can happen. And that means you as Briar have a disadvantage, or the Oldhim player has an advantage. And in that draft, as Oldhim, I played against 3 Briar players, and I won against 3 Briar players. And I'm not saying all their decks were bad, because they were really solid. One could even say they were good, and they were good. They were good players. But yeah, it's a draft. It depends on so many variables. You cannot say that this strictly wins against that, but it does have an advantage. And we're going to speak about some more advantages and evaluations and numbers and examples in the other 2 videos of the Briar Draft Guide trilogy. Stay tuned.